We're very fortunate to have Deven Upadhyay with us. He's from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. They're our regional wholesaler here in Southern California. Deven is the manager of the Water Resource Management Group. He started at Metropolitan in 1995 as a resource specialist in the Planning and Resource Department. Then he worked at the Municipal Water District of Orange County for a few years before going back to Metropolitan. Part of his responsibility is water resources programs for conservation, local resource projects, groundwater recovery, and conjunctive use programs. So Deven, let me get your presentation, but come on up. It's going to take a second. Sure. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning. So can I just ask a quick question? How many folks are from this area or have come here from out of town? How many folks from out of town? Okay, quite a few. Well, Jeff had mentioned that I'm the manager of water resources for the Metropolitan Water District. And for those that are from out of town, the Metropolitan Water District is a wholesale agency that provides about half of the water that's used here in urban Southern California. So about half the water for an area of 19 million people. And when we think about the challenges that we face in terms of providing reliable water supplies into the future, one of the main reasons that Metropolitan was brought into existence back in the 30s was the issue of distribution. And this was really a kind of a traditional problem that society had, and we went to the old school method that I think the Romans kind of pioneered, as you see here in these graphics, with aqueducts that brought water from sources to where the populace is in the order of 30 to 70 miles long. Well, we took that to a different level here in Southern California and put together an aqueduct system that brought water from the Colorado River a couple hundred miles long into the LA basin. And if you look at the development of water supplies in the state of California, that really was kind of the basis of our initial history in terms of technology here. It was how to move water around the state. You can see this in order of the aqueduct systems that were developed in the state, starting with the LA aqueduct system that brought water from Owens Valley down into the yellow area, which is our service area, but the Los Angeles service area for the LA aqueducts. The McKellamney and Hetch Hetchy aqueducts were built to bring water to the Bay Area. The red lines that you see in the center of California there. We built the Colorado River Aqueduct, and we're also the single largest contractor for the State Water Project facilities that bring water through the Bay Delta area down to our service area and many municipalities along the way. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. As we developed as an agency, we also started to tackle many of the growing water quality concerns, source water protection, looking at improvements to our distribution system, and also implementation of new treatment technologies over time. At this point, we've got 5 treatment plants. 3 of those treatment plants are considered some of the largest in the nation. And if you look at our history, one of the reasons that we were brought into being to bring those imported supplies into the area was that we were seeing local resources that were not projected to be enough to support the population that was growing in the area. And what we saw coming off projections for the 40s and the 50s was pretty significant growth in our service area that would outstrip the local resources that were available. What this graphic shows was the potential for degradation in groundwater resources as we saw continued pulls from the groundwater basins, potential for seawater intrusion that would impact the water quality in those basins. And part of the reasoning here was that imported supplies could help with the conjunctive management of those basins. So in times that imported supplies were available, we would be able to use more of those supplies, give the basins a rest, perhaps back off on some of the pumping, and then be able to rely on those basins more in dry conditions in the future and work together between the groundwater and the surface water supplies that we'd be bringing. So if we look at the challenges that we face now, it's an order of magnitude greater than what we faced back in the 30s and 40s when we first brought this into being. I think we're familiar with a lot of these, but one of the things that I would want to point out is it's not just on the supply side anymore. What we consider to be a pretty significant uncertainty for Metropolitan and our agencies is on the demand side, in terms of the projections for population and economic growth and how that's going to impact the need for water supplies going forward, not just the risk to the supplies themselves. Regulations, and I'll focus on a few things that we're experiencing right now that are at the forefront of our minds. Regulations are not necessarily one of those external forces that nature brings upon us. It's something that we impose on ourselves. But from a water quality perspective and also from an environmental protection perspective, these are things that are impacting our supplies today. The endangered species list seems to be growing, and threatened species are growing, and as more are listed, we're starting to be impacted more, particularly on the imported supplies, but also in the potential supplies that we could be developing. And I'll talk a little bit about seawater desalination and how some of the thoughts about new technology there could be helping to deal with these issues going forward. Costs are only growing for us. If you live here in Southern California, you've probably seen over the last decade, depending on where you live, a doubling in water rates. And I know that this is a national phenomenon that's occurring. Energy costs are a significant input into the cost of water supply provision. If you look in the state of California, about 20% of the power that's used in the state of California is associated with water in some way. We're also looking at significant capital investments, and I'll talk to you about one of those projects in the Bay Delta a little bit later. But it's starting to become more of an issue of single big projects being the things of the past, and many distributed smaller projects being the face of the future for water. And part of that is aging infrastructure. If you look in California, there was that boom time in the 40s and the 50s where you had a lot of local municipalities building water systems that are now 60, potentially 70 years old. And so that's starting to catch up with us, particularly in the areas that chose to keep rates low and not necessarily invest as much in terms of the upkeep of those systems. That's catching up, and so it's driving costs upwards as we're trying to reinvest in that system and provide reliability for the next 50 years. Another area of concern for us are really the public perception with respect to certain water supplies. What I've got on the slide here is recycled water. We do know that going forward, we're going to be relying more and more on recycling and reuse as a supply. The traditional means there have been to take recycled water and move it through purple pipe and apply it to irrigation, whether it's public parks or whether it's golf courses. But moving forward, we're going to see more and more focus on indirect potable reuse and potentially direct potable reuse in the future. And we'll be dealing with the questions that the public has about safety and dealing with the terms toilet to tap and trying to change that potentially to showers to flowers going forward as people start to become a little bit more accepting of this, and we'll be working on that. If you look at governance, particularly here in California, in that service area I had mentioned, we're talking about 300 different agencies that provide water service. So while we are a larger agency providing about half the supply that's used, that goes through a network of agencies. And there are some challenges there, particularly as you start to see more and more concerns among the public with respect to public agencies, government entities, a distrust for us. I think we tend to be more at a low point there right now, and that represents a bit of a challenge for us moving forward. And finally, water rates. I had mentioned the doubling of water rates in many areas here in California over the last 10 years has brought up questions about willingness and capability to pay for many of these things as we go forward. So we're looking at the ability for society in general to pay for these things. I think there's a fair amount of research that is starting to indicate that yes, there is the ability to pay, but again, we're dealing with a perception issue that will be a challenge and unfortunately can lead to regime change at agencies like ours as you go through these transitions. So the biggest challenge that I think people are really aware of now, and it's growing in the state of California, relates to the Bay Delta region. And the reason that there are issues here starts with the fact that the Bay Delta region is really a hub for the water supply system in the state of California. If you look at the water that moves from the upper watersheds through the Bay Delta to users, it's really 25 million people in the state of California. And ultimately, that water is also making its way to irrigated areas that are providing about half of the nation's fruits and vegetables, particularly in the Central Valley region. So we know that there is a lot of dependence on the Bay Delta from a water supply perspective. But it's also a key freshwater, saltwater estuary. And so in terms of the risks that the Delta faces, we think of it not just in terms of the water supply risk, but also in terms of the ecosystem risk. And we've seen ebb and flow in terms of the nature of the fisheries in the Bay Delta and the health of the fisheries in the Bay Delta. More recently, there's been quite a bit of focus on the Delta smelt as a key fish that lives in the Bay Delta that's known as an indicator species. The reason it's known as an indicator species is there is a belief in the scientific community that as the Delta smelt goes, so goes the overall ecosystem. And if that particular indicator species is doing well, the overall ecosystem is doing well. But we're facing other risks in the Delta that pose risk both for the ecosystem and for water supply provision. The graphic on the right top shows the impact of subsidence. Over the years, we've seen the Delta really become a network of islands that are protected by a levee system. And in many cases, if you go into the Delta, you'll see that the surface levels within the islands are 30 to 40 feet below the water elevation that's on the other side of the levees, which keys into the seismic risk in the Delta. As the Delta is crossed by many faults, we know that research is showing a 6.5 magnitude earthquake in the Delta could cause upwards of 20 of the islands that are in the Delta to be inundated due to levee failure, which then causes a water quality risk for us because as those islands are inundated with salt water, they become salt sinks in the Delta that could cause problems not for a series of months, but a series of years to flush the water back out to create more of a freshwater condition there. And finally, sea level rise represents a risk both to the levee system that I had mentioned, potential overtopping of the levees and ultimate failure there, but it also impacts the ecosystem there. I had mentioned that it's an ecosystem that thrives off of the interface between saltwater and freshwater, and as you have sea level rise, you're going to start to see that interface move, and the nature of the ecosystem and where that ecosystem resides will move. And it will have to transition. So as we look at current solutions that we have implemented or in the process of implementing, it starts with what I refer to as a mutual fund approach to investing in water resources. This graphic shows where we project to be in the year 2035 in dry year resources in this area. And you can see the State Water Project and the Colorado River Aqueduct as imported supplies, a slice of local supplies that represents things like our groundwater production, groundwater cleanup or recovery of groundwater that otherwise couldn't be used without treatment, local wastewater recycling, and the potential for seawater desalination also as part of that slice in the future. A significant slice that's conservation and water use efficiency, which we reflect as a supply in the sense that it has the same benefits as a supply to the region. But if you were thinking about the impact on demands, it's actually reducing the demand for water use in that given year. And storage and transfers. A key component of our strategy is the ability to take those wet year conditions, store some of that water, and then move the benefits of those wet years into the dry years by pulling back out of storage. And so this strategy, we also think of it as three separate components. The first component in our planning is to deal with what we think would cover our future and meet future demands under historic hydrologies. So we look at about 100 years of historic hydrologies, and forecast that over the future and make sure that our plans would meet demands under all of those scenarios. Our second component is something we've come to refer to as a supply buffer. And the reason behind having this component is we know that plans do not always go according to plan. The future doesn't always turn out the way you expect. So there are going to be things, whether it's climate change, future regulation with respect to the environment or water quality, that are going to either perhaps increase our demands or erode our supplies in a way such that we need to plan for more than simply meeting historic hydrologic projections. And so that's the supply buffer. Our supply buffer in our plan is about 5%, or 200,000 acre feet, where Metropolitan and our service area, our demands in our service area are typically about 4 million acre feet a year in a single year. And then the third component of our plan is setting forth foundational actions. And what that means is doing things now to try to reduce the time it takes to respond to a new emerging condition. An example of that is working to try to streamline permitting processes and be able to get new facilities like recycling facilities online faster than we're able to now. Right now, that timeline is in the range of 8 to 10 years, and we would like to be able to reduce that timeline. So when we know that a new emergent condition has come about, we're able to react by bringing on new supplies or managing demands a little bit faster. This approach and philosophy has led us over the years to invest about $750 million in local resource development and water use efficiency conservation programs. If you look at the acre feet figures, that's led to about 4 million acre feet in either water savings or new supply production as a result of those investments. And you can see the graphic on the right is our service area from Ventura County in the north down to the Mexican border in San Diego County in the south, and really projects that have been distributed throughout that service area. We've also added significant storage. I had mentioned that storage and transfers are a part of that future mix. As of now, we've got more than 5 million acre feet of storage in our service area and outside of our service area on imported systems that will allow us to deal with dry years and drought systems. That has been developed over the last 15 to 20 years. And again, on a basis of 4 million acre feet of retail demands, we provide about half of that supply a year, so it's about 2 million acre feet. So this represents storage that's 2.5 years of storage if it were full. And finally, in dealing with the Bay Delta, we're looking at what's ultimately going to be a habitat conservation program that has a two-pronged approach. One of them is ecosystem restoration and providing protections for the ecosystem, and the other is supply reliability. And so that approach has us investing in habitat and also investing in a series of tunnels and new outlet structures for the export system. This is something that's in the planning process right now and is in ultimately the final phases of an environmental impact report that would be released next year. In terms of water use efficiency, actually I think I'll go into greater detail on that in a few minutes. The continuing challenges really involve a lot of the things that I've brought up here, but what I'd like to focus on are some of the areas that we see as potential for research and additional technology going forward. In terms of climate change, part of the key for us is estimating the impacts both of climate change on water supplies, but also sea level rise on coastal communities. And this definitely has an impact in the Bay Delta Conservation Plan that I had mentioned, as it impacts our projections of what's going to happen over time with respect to the ecosystem and that saltwater freshwater interface in terms of where it resides. And where it is in reference to the pumping locations for exports from the Bay Delta. Drought early warning systems an example that I would give you here where that could be very important, even if it's only a few months ahead of schedule, is many of our programs are based on cooperative arrangements where we have actually done deals with the farming community. And to the extent that there is a time coming up where we need additional supplies, we can pay for farming communities to fallow land, take a break from farming for a year. We're able to access the water supply that would have been used for farming for that year, and then a year later it goes back to the farms for farming again. One of the challenges there is not wanting to interrupt a crop cycle as it's in the middle of production. And so the earlier warnings that we're able to have, even if it's a matter of a few months, can help with the planning with those cooperative agreements. Also looking at greenhouse gas regulation and the impacts on costs leads right into needing to improve this understanding of the water energy nexus. And I had mentioned earlier in the state of California the figure of about 20% of power being associated with water. The more that we're able to understand both how energy and water can work together and how improvements in energy use and water use actually impact each other, the better. On the energy side, we're also looking at regulations in the state of California that will cause us to move more and more towards renewable energy sources, which has an impact both in terms of sustainability but also in terms of the cost that we see going forward. And the more that we can actually impact that power cost, the more that we're going to be able to actually have sustainable water rates and water provision in our service area. Water use efficiency. I've got another slide here that I think gets a little more to the point. We've really done a ton of work in indoor water use. If you go back to the early 80s, we were starting the discussion about how to reduce flow in toilets, and we've gone through a number of iterations of that where we're progressively using less and less. Now the focus really is outside the home, outside the business, where 50 to 70% of water use resides now. And so the low-hanging fruit for us is looking at weather-based irrigation controllers and technologies, making sure that the distribution of water is such that when you drive by places, you're not seeing the sidewalk and the concrete getting irrigated, but you're seeing the plants get irrigated. We're looking into salt-tolerant grasses. People, as much as our programs that remove turf are very successful, people still like to see turf. And so the more that we're able to see development of grasses that are salt-tolerant, that means that there can be more application of recycled supplies. We're also looking at drought-tolerant grasses that fundamentally use less water than other alternatives. And working in terms of public perception and acceptance on drought-tolerant landscaping as something that is appropriate and also pretty. Water pricing, a key area here in terms of research is the impact of rate structures on water use. And one of the questions that we're very interested in understanding is, as we've seen new rate structures go into place, we've seen water use impacted by that. These rate structures tend to be budget-based or increasing block rate structures, so the more you use over time, the more you pay. And every time that we've seen that go into place, we've also seen significant outreach campaigns associated with water use and the implementation of those new rate structures. When a district puts one of these into place, they need to communicate a lot with their customers to talk about how that change is occurring. We don't know enough about how much of that reduced water use that results is actually coming from the rate structure itself or coming from the communication that's actually happening as people put those rate structures into place. So another area of, I think, low-hanging fruit for water research to look into the benefits of those two things as separate items, the communication versus the rate structure. These things are costly, and it would help inform where best we can place our money going forward. Water quality is of growing concern for us, not just because we're going to have to develop technologies to deal with it, but also because the list of things that we're dealing with is growing, it seems, year by year. and the treatment technologies will have to come along to be able to deal with that. On the seawater desalination side, the last slide here, the area that we're really focused on right now, particularly in the state and processes with the State Water Resources Control Board, is looking at the impact of the systems that bring water into, or potentially bring water into, desalination plants, and then the effluent from desalination plants and the impact on sea life, both in terms of the potential velocity of the water coming into the plants, and then on the way out, the higher saline water, that effluent, how does it disperse through the water in the area, and what is the impact, or what are the toxicity levels on sea life? It may be that you're actually increasing salt water and there isn't an impact on sea life because it's resilient. It may be that some areas that are site-specific are very responsive to higher salt content. So those are key areas that we're looking at right now to try to further the ball. In terms of the call for action today, Jeff had talked about our agenda really focusing on innovation and technology improvement and the gains that we can see there. I would view each of these challenges that I've discussed as an opportunity for innovation to come to play and improve things. But I would throw another challenge out there for your consideration as we're listening to the presentations today. The water community has been very good at operating in a stealth fashion. I think one of the things or philosophies that we've had over the years is that if water is in the news, it's usually a bad thing. One of the impacts of that has been that our industry has been overshadowed by other industries that have captured the minds of our new generation. Our generation doesn't tend to think about growing up and contributing to water, although they are looking at how they can have impact. And so one of the things I can think of, I can't think of many industries that have the potential for an individual to have great impact on millions of people around the world as water does. So I think it's also before us today to not just look at the improvements in technology, but also how we can capture the minds of the youth to be focusing on this and be the folks that are sitting in this room 10 years from now. Thank you.